7 True Trucker Horror Stories. Story 1. The Shoulder Walkers. I-70, Kansas. The first time I saw one, I didn't think much of it. Just some figure on the side of the road in the middle of the night. I was driving through Kansas on I-70 making good time when I noticed a person walking along the shoulder. Nothing unusual about that, I thought. People break down all the time. But the more I drove, the more I started seeing them. Not just one or two, but dozens of them over the years. Always at night. Always on the shoulder. Never during the day. Other truckers call them the moon wanders, but I call them the shoulder walkers because that is exactly what they do. They walk that white line like it is a track they cannot leave. They are different shapes and sizes. Men, women, tall, short, fat, thin. Some are beautiful, some are ugly. They look like normal people you would see anywhere on the street. But something is wrong. Something is deeply, terribly wrong about them. For a long time I did not pay them much mind. I would see them for a split second as I drove past, and then they would disappear into the darkness behind me. But one night everything changed. It was 3 a.m, and I was making a run through the flat Kansas plains. The sky was black as pitch, and there was nothing around for miles. No cars, no lights, no signs of life except for the hum of my engine. I was tired but pushing through. I had a delivery deadline and I was making good time. That is when I saw her. She was standing on the shoulder of the road just at the edge of my headlights. She was wearing a white dress that looked like it had not been washed in years. Her skin was pale, almost gray. Her hair was thin and stringy, hanging down like spider webs. But it was her eyes that got to me. Even from inside my cab, I could see that they were wrong. They were sunken deep into her skull, and they were staring right at me. I slowed down as I approached her. Every instinct in my body was telling me to keep driving, to not stop, to not look at her. But I could not help myself. I had to see her face. And when I did, my blood turned to ice water. Her mouth was open in a wide, impossible smile. Her teeth were black and broken. Her face was thin and skeletal, like she had not eaten in decades. But the worst part was that she was looking directly at me and she was moving. She was walking toward my truck. I pressed down on the gas trying to get away from her, but she was fast, faster than any human being should be able to move. Before I knew what was happening, she had grabbed my truck and was pulling herself up toward my window. I could hear the scraping of her fingernails on the metal of my cab. I swerved the truck hard to the left, trying to shake her off. For a moment it worked, but then I heard the sound of her feet hitting the ground, and I looked in my side mirror. She had jumped down, but she was still following me. She was running now, keeping pace with my truck. I was driving at 70 miles per hour, and this thing was running alongside me like it was nothing. I looked ahead and saw the road curve to the right. I made a quick decision. I jerked the wheel to the right and accelerated. The G-force of the turn threw me against the door, but I heard a terrible scream behind me. When I looked in my mirror, she was no longer there. I drove for another 10 miles before I had the courage to slow down. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely hold the steering wheel. My heart was pounding in my chest like it was going to burst out of my rib cage. I was drenched in sweat, and I could not stop thinking about those eyes. Those horrible sunken eyes. I have seen many shoulder walkers since that night. I have learned that the best thing to do is to never ever stop for them. Never look at them directly. Never try to help them. Just drive. Keep your eyes forward and drive. Because if you do, if you stop or slow down or try to interact with them, they will notice you. And once they notice you, they will never stop following you. That is the truth about the shoulder walkers. They are real. They are out there on the highways at night, walking along the white line, waiting for someone to acknowledge them. And if you ever see one, I hope you have the sense to just keep driving. Story 2. The Fog on Route 265, Kentucky. My name is Marcus, and I am a big man, 6'3", 250 pounds. I have driven trucks for 20 years, and I have never been afraid of anything. But there is one night that changed me forever. There is one night that I cannot forget, no matter how hard I try. It was the week before Christmas and I was driving for Costco. The company had called me in for a special job. There was a rural location in Kentucky that was running low on inventory for the holiday season. They needed someone who could drive fast and get there quickly. I was the perfect guy for the job. The load was full of giant Spider-Man dolls. Thousands of them, all stacked up in my trailer. They looked almost human, with their painted faces and outstretched arms. I should have known then that something was wrong. I should have known that this was not going to be an easy drive. I left the warehouse at 1 a.m, heading south on Highway 265. The route was simple and straightforward. Straight highway, minimal traffic, and I would have plenty of time to spare. I felt confident. I felt in control. But at 3 a.m, something changed. It started with a feeling. A creeping sensation at the back of my neck, like someone was watching me. I felt tired, more tired than I should have been. So I pulled over at a rest stop and grabbed some no-dose pills. I took a couple and got back on the road. 15 minutes later, the fog rolled in. I had never seen fog like this before. It was not a gentle mist that you could see through. It was thick and suffocating, like a living thing. It pressed against my windshield with such force that I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. I was driving at 70 miles per hour, and I could only see 10 feet ahead. The Spider-Man dolls in the back seemed to disappear into the haze like they were no longer there. I slowed down and pulled over to the side of the road to wait it out. I was ahead of schedule anyway. A few minutes would not make any difference. The moment my truck came to a stop, the engine died. No warning. No sputtering. The engine just shut off like someone had flipped a switch. The lights went out. The radio died. The CB went silent. I was sitting in complete darkness in thick fog in the middle of nowhere, with an engine that would not start. I tried the ignition again and again. Nothing. I looked at my cell phone, hoping to call for help. No signal. The phone screen showed no bars at all, like I had left the world of the living and entered some kind of dead zone. I sat there for 5 minutes, trying to figure out what to do. And then I heard it, crying. It was quiet at first, just barely audible above the sound of the wind and the fog. But it was there. It was the sound of a child crying, high-pitched and desperate, like the child was in pain or afraid. I got out of my cab to look around to see if there was a child on the road that needed help. But there was nothing, just fog and darkness. I called out, but no one answered. So I got back in my cab and locked the doors. The crying got louder. It started to change. The voice got deeper. It was no longer a child crying. It was a woman now. A woman crying with despair and anguish, like her heart had been torn out of her chest. She was somewhere in the fog, calling out in pain. Against my better judgment, I rolled down my window. I called out, "Is anyone there? Do you need help?" The crying stopped immediately, and then I heard laughter. It was not normal laughter. It was not the sound of a human being enjoying a joke or a funny moment. This was something else. This was laughter that was filled with malice and cruelty and something I could not name. This was laughter that made my skin crawl and my stomach turn. And I knew with absolute certainty that this laughter was directed at me. I rolled up my window as fast as I could. The laughter got louder. The more scared I became, the louder it got. It was like it was feeding off my fear, growing stronger and more intense with every second that passed. I was trembling. I was sweating. I was more afraid than I had ever been in my entire life. And then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The fog began to lift. The darkness began to fade, and my truck started back up all by itself. The engine came to life. The lights came on. The radio began to play soft music. I did not hesitate. I drove out of there like I was escaping from hell itself. I drove for hours without stopping, without looking back, without thinking about anything except getting away from that place. When I finally arrived at the truck stop, I ran to the bathroom and splashed water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror and asked, "Did that really just happen? Did I really experience that, or am I losing my mind? I went to the diner and sat at the counter. I needed to talk to someone else. I needed to know that I was not crazy. A man in a John Deere hat and red flannel shirt was sitting nearby. I approached him and said, "Excuse me, are you a trucker? I just had one hell of an experience and I need to tell someone about it." He looked at me with understanding eyes. He nodded slowly. "I am not a trucker," he said, "but I know what you're talking about. That road, that place. There are others who have experienced the same thing. There are many stories about that stretch of highway." He did not say anything else. He just finished his coffee and left. I have never driven that route again. I have turned down jobs that would take me back there. I do not care if they pay me twice as much. I will never go back to that place, because I know now that there are things on this earth that we do not understand, things that should not be approached or questioned or acknowledged, and that fog on Route 265 in Kentucky is one of them. Story 3, The Revolutionary Soldier. Pennsylvania mountains. I was a night driver for the first part of my career. I drove a lot of routes in Pennsylvania, mostly through the mountains. The roads there are winding and dangerous, especially at night. You have to be very careful to keep your attention on the road and not fall asleep behind the wheel. One mistake and you can go over the edge and die. I have seen the evidence of those mistakes. I have seen the burned-out hulks of trucks that went too fast around a curve. I have seen the twisted metal and the debris scattered across the mountain slopes. Those images never leave you. The Pennsylvania mountains are old, older than most places in America. The Appalachian Range has been there for hundreds of millions of years, and in that time, a lot of history has soaked into the stone and soil. The Native Americans hunted there. The colonists settled there. The Revolutionary War was fought there, and sometimes I think the mountains remember all of it. I was following a flatbed truck through the mountains one night, driving through a section that I had traveled many times before. The driver in front of me was pushing hard, moving fast through the curves. He was experienced, but he was also aggressive. He was the kind of driver who believed that speed was more important than caution. I was doing my best to keep up with him, but my van was starting to lean too much on the turns. I could feel the weight shifting as I went around each curve. I was starting to lose focus and fall back. The road was narrow and winding with thick forest on both sides. My headlights could only see so far ahead, and the darkness beyond my beam felt suffocating. There were no other vehicles on the road. There were no lights except for my own. It was just me and the forest and the endless curves that seemed to go on forever. I reached down and grabbed a Monster energy drink from my cooler to stay awake. The drink was warm from sitting in my cab for hours, but I did not care. I needed the caffeine. I took a long drink and felt the liquid slide down my throat. The taste was artificial and overly sweet, but I did not care about that either. I just needed to stay awake. I needed to stay focused. I took a long drink and felt the caffeine hit my system. My heart rate picked up a little bit. My eyes felt a bit wider. I was getting a small boost of energy. I looked up at the road ahead, and that is when I saw him. There was a man standing off to the shoulder of the road just outside the tree line. He was standing perfectly still, like he had been waiting there all night for someone to drive by. My first thought was that his truck had broken down. Maybe he needed help. But something about him did not look right. His posture seemed wrong. His clothes seemed wrong. He was wearing a uniform, not a modern uniform like you would see on a soldier today. This was an old uniform, very old. It looked like something from the Revolutionary War, the kind of uniform that I had only seen in history books and museums. He had a tricorn hat and a coat that went down to his knees. The coat looked like wool, and it was the color of faded red and brown. In his hands he was holding a musket. Not a rifle, not a modern gun, a musket, an 18th century musket just like the ones that soldiers carried during the American Revolution. My mind was racing. Was this some kind of reenactor? Was there a historical event happening nearby that I did not know about? But it was 3 in the morning. Who would be out in the middle of the night in full Revolutionary War uniform carrying a musket? I had to slow down to get a better look at him. My curiosity was overriding my caution. I knew I should have just kept driving, but I could not help myself. I had to know what this was. I had to understand what I was seeing. As I approached, I could see him more clearly. His face was pale and gaunt, like he had not eaten in weeks or months. His cheeks were sunken in. His skin had a grayish tint to it. His eyes were dark and hollow, like empty pits staring out of his skull. But he was staring right at me. Not at my truck, not at the road, at me. He was staring directly into my face, even though I was inside my cab and he should not have been able to see me clearly. The intensity of his gaze was almost physical. It felt like he was staring right through the glass of my windshield, right through the metal of my cab, right into my core. I could not look away. I tried to look at the road, but my eyes kept drifting back to him. There was something about his stare that would not let me go. And then he started walking backward into the tree line. But he never took his eyes off me. Not for a single moment. He just kept walking deeper and deeper into the woods, staring at me the entire time. His feet moved slowly, carefully, like he was walking backward on an uneven surface. But his eyes never wavered. His head never turned. He just kept looking at me as he disappeared into the darkness of the forest. I was so focused on watching him that I almost missed the moment when he disappeared. I almost missed the curve in the road. But my training kicked in and I made the turn just in time. I looked back toward where he had been standing. 1 second he was there, maybe 10 feet into the trees, his face still visible in my headlights. The next second he was gone. Not gradually. Not like he walked away and I lost sight of him behind a tree or a bush. He vanished. He simply ceased to exist, like he had never been there at all. It was like he had walked into the darkness and been swallowed by it, like the forest had opened up and taken him inside itself. At that exact moment, the temperature in my cab dropped about 20 degrees. I had my windows down because I had been trying to stay awake and keep fresh air flowing in. Now that window felt like a mouth opening up to let in the cold from outside. The cold poured in and I could feel it in my bones. My whole body started to shiver. I could see my breath now. It was coming out in clouds of mist, like I had suddenly been transported to the Arctic. The air had gone from warm to frigid in less than a second. There had been no gradual change. There had been no warning. The temperature had just dropped like someone had switched on an air conditioner set to the coldest setting. I pressed down on the gas and drove hard to get away from that place. I wanted to put distance between myself and whatever I had just seen. I drove for a mile, maybe 2 miles, pushing my van as fast as it would go on those winding mountain roads. The curves whipped past me in a blur. My tires squealed on the pavement. I was driving recklessly, but I did not care. I just wanted to get away. And then slowly, gradually, the temperature started to come back to normal. My breath stopped coming out in clouds of mist. The cold that had been cutting through my cab began to retreat. By the time I had driven 5 miles, my cab felt warm again. The cold was gone, but the fear remained. But I could not shake the feeling that stayed with me for hours afterward. It was a deep sadness, not the kind of sadness you feel when someone dies or you have bad news. This was different. This was a sadness that seemed to come from outside me, from somewhere else seeping into my consciousness. This was the sadness of loss and regret and pain that went back hundreds of years. This was the sadness of a man who had died in war, far from home, far from the people he loved. This was the sadness of someone who had never finished what he had come to do, someone whose purpose on this earth had been cut short by violence and blood. I did not stop driving that night. I did not stop until I reached my destination and I could sign off my shift. When I finally did pull over and get out of my truck, my legs were shaking so badly that I could barely stand up. My shirt was soaked with sweat. My mind was exhausted from trying to make sense of what I had seen. To this day, I have no explanation for what I saw. I have told this story to many people and they think I am crazy. They smile and nod like they are humoring me. They change the subject. They pretend like they did not hear what I just said. But I know what I saw. I know what I experienced. I felt that cold. I saw that face. I felt that overwhelming sadness. And I know that the spirits of the dead are still out there on those Pennsylvania roads, walking through the trees, waiting for someone to acknowledge them. They are trapped between this world and the next, unable to move on. And sometimes when they see a living person, they try to make contact. They try to tell their story. They try to make sure that they are remembered. I have driven those Pennsylvania roads many times since that night. I have looked carefully at the shoulders and the tree lines, hoping to catch another glimpse of him. I have asked other drivers if they have seen anything strange in that area. Most of them say no, but a few of them have nodded knowingly. A few of them have told me similar stories. Different ghosts, different uniforms, but the same feeling of sadness and loss. I believe that the Revolutionary War was fought in those mountains. I believe that soldiers died there. I believe that their blood soaked into the earth and their spirits became trapped in the stone. And I believe that sometimes on cold and quiet nights they walk those roads, looking for someone who will listen to their story, someone who will remember them, someone who will acknowledge that they existed, that they fought, that they died for something they believed in. That is what I saw that night. That is what I will always remember. Story 4. The Man in the Gray Suit. Albuquerque to Socorro. The high desert is a weird place. There is something about that landscape that makes you feel like you are not alone. Even when you are driving for hours without seeing another vehicle, you have this sense that something is watching you. Something is out there in the darkness keeping pace with your truck. The desert has a presence to it. The land itself seems alive in a way that other places are not. The rocks, the sand, the sparse vegetation, the endless sky. It all seems to be observing you. It all seems to know that you are there. I learned this the hard way. I was driving from Albuquerque to Socorro on a stretch of highway that I had driven many times before. It is not a long drive. It is maybe a couple of hours under normal circumstances. But this particular stretch of highway is strange. Even during the daytime, when the sun is bright and the road is clearly visible, there is something unsettling about it. I was on a stretch with no lights. I mean, absolutely no lights. No street lights, no signs, no other vehicles. Just the beam of my headlights cutting through the darkness, showing me a small section of empty road ahead. Behind me was nothing but blackness. Beside me on both sides was nothing but blackness. It was like I was driving through the void, like I was the only thing that existed in the entire universe. The radio stations were fading in and out, struggling to reach me from the cities that were hundreds of miles away. I would find a station, listen to it for a few minutes, and then watch as the signal degraded and the music turned into static. Then I would search for another station and repeat the process. It was an endless cycle of finding and losing, and the silence in between was worse than any bad radio station could ever be. I was getting tired. My eyes were starting to feel heavy. My concentration was starting to slip. I was thinking about stopping at the next rest area to take a break, maybe close my eyes for a few minutes, maybe splash some water on my face to wake myself up. And that is when I saw him. There was a man standing on the side of the road, just standing there in the darkness like he was waiting for someone to drive by. He was standing perfectly still, in the exact center of my vision, silhouetted against the black desert behind him. I did not think much of it at first. Maybe his car had broken down. Maybe he was waiting for help. It was not unusual to see stranded drivers on the highway. It happened all the time. I slowed down a bit to get a better look at him. I was trying to figure out if I should stop to help or if I should just keep driving. This was before cell phones were everywhere, before everyone had a way to call for help instantly. Back then, if your car broke down, you had to flag down another driver and hope they would stop. As I got closer, my headlights fully illuminated his face. Everything about him was wrong. His posture was unnatural. His body seemed to bend at angles that human bodies should not bend. The way he was standing did not make sense from a biomechanical perspective. His arms hung down too far. His neck was angled too steeply. His legs seemed to connect to his hips in a way that looked painful and distorted. It was like someone had taken a human skeleton and tried to assemble it incorrectly. His clothes were all wrong, too. He was wearing a gray suit like he was dressed for a business meeting in the middle of the desert. Not just any business suit, but a very old-fashioned one. The kind of suit that someone might have worn in the 1950s or 1960s. The fabric was dusty and faded, and it looked like it had not been cleaned in decades. But somehow, despite being so old and worn, the suit maintained its shape. It was not wrinkled or torn. It was pristine in a way that made no sense given how old and worn it appeared. And his face was not right. It looked like a mask. Like someone had taken a rubber mask and stretched it over a skull. The kind of mask you might see in a horror movie or a haunted house. The features did not move naturally when I looked at him. The skin was too smooth, too perfect, too artificial. The eyes did not blink. They just stared straight ahead, unmoving and unchanging. The mouth did not move. It was not frowning or smiling. It was just a line, a thin line, perfectly drawn on the surface of the mask. The color of his face was wrong too. It was gray, not like the color of a person with a skin condition or someone who was sick. It was the gray of concrete or asphalt. It was the gray of stone. It was the gray of something that had never been alive, something that had always been dead. For about half a second, our eyes locked. And in that moment, I knew that this thing was looking at me, not my truck, not the road, me. It could see me inside the cab. It was aware of me. It knew I was there. It knew who I was and what I was doing and why I was driving down this road at this time of night. And it was interested in me. There was no expression on its face. No smile, no expression of recognition or hunger or anything else that might indicate emotion. But I could feel the weight of its attention. I could feel it concentrating on me. I could feel it trying to understand me or communicate with me or reach me somehow across the distance that separated us. I did not hesitate. I did not think about it. I did not question my instinct. My instinct was screaming at me to get away from this thing, and I obeyed that instinct without reservation. I pressed down on the gas and drove as fast as my truck could go. The speedometer climbed, 60 miles per hour, 70 miles per hour, 80 miles per hour. The road curved and twisted, but I kept my foot on the gas. I was not worried about losing control or going over the edge. I was only worried about putting distance between myself and that thing on the side of the road. I expected to see him disappear in my rearview mirror, to watch his silhouette fade into the distance as I pulled away. But he did not. He just stood there watching me drive away, and as I drove, his head turned. His masked face turned to follow the direction of my truck. He kept watching me even as I drove away from him. He kept his gaze locked on me until I had driven so far that I could no longer see him in my mirror. A few minutes after I passed him, my CB radio started picking up odd chirps and static. I was not close enough to any cities for that to make sense. I was in the middle of the high desert. There should have been nothing out there. No radio towers, no broadcast signals. The CB should have been clear, but there was interference. There was something on the radio that should not have been there. I tried to change the channel, but the static followed me. No matter what channel I tuned to, there was that same disturbing chirping sound. It was rhythmic and repetitive. It was almost like Morse code, like someone was trying to send me a message using the radio as a medium, but the message did not make sense. It was just chirps and hisses and bursts of static. It was like something was trying to communicate with me through the radio, but it could not quite figure out how to form words. It could not quite figure out how to make the radio produce human speech. The chirping got louder and more intense. I tried adjusting the dial, but no matter what I did, the sound remained. I tried turning the volume down, but I could still hear it. It seemed to be coming from inside my head, not from the speakers. I eventually gave up and turned the CB off. I switched off the radio entirely and drove the rest of the way in silence. The only sound was the hum of my engine and the sound of my tires on the pavement and my own breathing, which was coming fast and shallow. But even now, years later, I think about that man in the gray suit. I think about that artificial face and those eyes that seemed to be aware of me. I think about what would have happened if I had stopped to help him. I think about what it might have wanted. I think about what might have happened if I had been in a different lane or driving a bit slower. I think about the possibility that it was not standing on that road by accident, that it had been waiting for me specifically, that it had been waiting there for hours or days or even years for someone like me to drive by. I am glad I will never know the answer to those questions. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, some encounters are better left unexplained, and some things that we see in the darkness are better forgotten. Story 5. The Savior Girl. Missouri. Rest stop. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes it comes from someone or something that you cannot quite explain. Sometimes it comes from beyond the veil that separates this world from the next. This is a story about the day I was saved by a voice in the darkness. This is a story about a guardian that appeared when I needed her most. I was driving through Missouri late at night. I had been on the road for 14 hours straight and I was exhausted. My eyes were heavy. My hands were cramping from gripping the steering wheel. My back was aching from sitting in the same position for so long. Every muscle in my body was screaming at me to stop and rest. I pulled off at an exit to stretch my legs and take a break. There was a rest area nearby and I decided to stop there for a few minutes. I was too tired to keep driving. I knew that I needed to get out of my cab and move around or I would fall asleep behind the wheel. I parked my truck in an empty spot and got out to walk around. The night air was cool and refreshing. It helped wake me up a little bit. I needed to get some blood flowing in my legs and clear my head. I was smoking a cigarette and trying to wake up, pacing back and forth near my truck, when I heard a voice. "Hi, mister." It was a little girl's voice, clear and bright and innocent. She was giggling like she thought something was funny, like she was playing a game. I immediately looked around to see where the sound was coming from, but I could not figure out where she was. There were no other cars at the rest stop. There were no people around. There were no other trucks, no other vehicles, nothing. It was just me in the darkness and this disembodied voice. My first reaction was confusion. Where could this voice be coming from? Maybe there was a family sleeping in a nearby car. Maybe there was a little girl in a vehicle that I had not noticed when I pulled in. I called out, "Hello, where are you?" "My mommy says you'll be okay," the girl said. Her voice was still distant, like she was far away. Very far away, like she was speaking to me from another dimension, another reality, another plane of existence. "Don't worry. She says everything is going to be fine. She says you are going to make it." I was confused and creeped out. Her words made no sense to me. "My mommy says you will be okay." How could someone's mother know anything about me? How could someone know that I was in danger or needed reassurance? What was a little girl doing at a rest stop in the middle of the night with no parents around? Where was her mother? Why was this child speaking to me? What did she want? I did not respond to her. I was starting to feel like I was in some kind of danger. The rest area, which had seemed like a quiet, peaceful place, now felt strange and unsettling. The darkness seemed deeper. The silence seemed louder. I decided to get back in my truck and get out of that rest stop as quickly as possible. I started walking back toward my cab. My cigarette was only half finished, but I did not care. I wanted to get out of there. I wanted to leave this place behind. But before I could get back to my cab, I felt it. Someone was standing right next to me. I could not see them. There was no one visible next to me, but I could feel their presence. It was like an invisible person was standing right at my shoulder. Like a ghost had materialized out of the darkness and positioned itself right beside me. My heart started racing. I almost ran. I almost screamed. Every instinct in my body was telling me to flee, to get away, to get into my truck and drive as fast as I could. But then I realized something. This presence did not feel bad or threatening. It actually felt protective, like someone was there to watch over me and keep me safe. The sensation was warm and comforting and almost maternal. It was like someone's arm was around me, shielding me from harm. It was like a mother protecting her child. I understood then in that moment what was happening. The little girl's mother was there. The presence that I was feeling was her. She had come to my aid. She had sent her daughter to warn me. She was protecting me from something. I did not know what, but I knew that I was in danger. I knew that if I had not heeded that warning, if I had not gotten back into my truck and driven away, something bad would have happened to me. I finished my cigarette with trembling hands and got back in my truck and drove away. I did not look back. I did not try to understand what had happened. I just drove. It was about 2 hours later that something very strange happened. My fuel warning light came on. The red indicator on my dashboard started blinking, telling me that my fuel tank was running low. I should have filled up at the rest stop, but I had not. I had been too confused and frightened by the encounter with the voice and the presence. The warning light was telling me that I was running very low on fuel. I quickly checked my GPS to find the nearest truck stop. There was one about 10 miles down the road. It was the only one for many, many miles. If I did not make it to that truck stop, I would run out of fuel in the middle of nowhere with no help within reach. I accelerated and pushed my truck hard to get there before I ran out of gas. My speedometer climbed higher. 70 miles per hour, 75 miles per hour, 80 miles per hour. I was taking risks, but I was desperate to reach that truck stop before my tank ran dry. When I pulled up to the fuel pump, my truck started sputtering. The engine was struggling. I was running on fumes. The fuel tank was almost completely empty. I barely made it to the fuel line before the engine died completely. The truck just stopped right there at the pump like it had been waiting for this exact moment to give up. I ran out of fuel just as I pulled up to the pump. If I had been traveling at a slightly different speed, I would have stalled in the middle of the highway. If I had stopped at the rest stop for a few more minutes, I would have run out of fuel before I reached the truck stop. If I had taken a different route, if I had gone a few miles per hour slower, if I had taken any other decision that was even slightly different from the ones I made that night, I would have run out of fuel in the middle of the desert with no help anywhere nearby. I would have been stranded, alone, in the middle of the night, with no cell service, with no way to call for help. In that vast, empty stretch of road between towns, that is when I realized what had happened. The little girl had saved my life. The voice in the darkness had been a warning. The feeling of someone protecting me had been real. Whatever that presence was, it had guided me to that truck stop. It had made sure that I made it to safety. It had made sure that I left that rest area at exactly the right time, traveling at exactly the right speed, so that I would arrive at the truck stop at exactly the right moment to avoid disaster. I have no explanation for what happened that night, but I know one thing for certain. There are things in this world that we do not understand. There are forces that work to protect us even when we do not know we need protection. There are guardians that watch over us, that guide us, that keep us safe from harm. And sometimes they come in the form of a little girl's voice in the darkness. Sometimes they come as a presence that you cannot see but can feel. Sometimes they come as a mother's love, reaching across the boundary between life and death to save a stranger from danger. I never found out who that girl was. I never found out who that presence was. But I know that they saved my life that night, and I will never forget them. Story 6. The Creature in the Bush. Northern Highway. The Northern Highway stretched on forever. It was a long gray ribbon cutting through endless walls of green. The trees grew thick and tall on both sides of the road. They leaned toward the pavement like they were trying to block out the sky. The air felt heavy and still, the kind of stillness that made your ears ring because there was nothing else to hear. No birds, no insects, no wind. Only the low hum of my truck as it rolled down that lonely road. I had been driving since dawn. That was not my usual routine. Most of my work happened after dark. I liked the night. It was quiet, empty. You did not have to deal with other drivers or the heat or the glare of the sun. But this job was different. The delivery had to be done during business hours. So there I was, pushing through daylight. My eyes were dry, my hands tight around the wheel, my body running on cheap coffee and a few hours of restless sleep. The northern part of the country is wild. You can drive for miles without seeing another soul. Sometimes you wonder if you are the only person left in the world. That is how it felt that day. Just me and the road and the trees. The highway twisted slightly as it climbed small rises and dipped through shallow valleys. Every now and then I would see a crow perched on a fence post, or a shape in the distance that turned out to be nothing but a shadow. Then I saw something. At first it was just movement ahead of me. Something dark crossed the highway from left to right. It happened far enough away that I had time to slow down. The shape was big, not the size of a bear or a moose, taller. It moved in a strange way. Not clumsy, not afraid. It moved like it knew exactly where it was going. I could not see any details. Only a large figure that disappeared into the thick green bush on the other side of the road. I frowned and leaned forward. My eyes followed the spot where it had gone. There was nothing there now. The forest looked calm again. Still, I told myself it must have been a moose. Maybe a trick of the light. Maybe I was tired. My brain was foggy from too many miles and not enough rest. But then something strange happened. As soon as my truck rolled past the place where the creature had crossed, I felt a shock go through my body. The hair on the back of my neck stood straight up. Goosebumps spread over my arms. It felt like stepping into cold water. My stomach turned. My heartbeat sped up for no reason at all. It was not fear of what I saw. It was fear of what I felt, a deep, heavy feeling that came from somewhere inside me. My instincts screamed at me to keep driving, to get away from that place as fast as I could. I pressed my foot on the gas and watched the trees blur past. My hands shook slightly on the wheel. The farther I drove, the lighter I felt. The air seemed to clear again. I told myself to forget it. By the time I reached the next town, I had almost convinced myself it was nothing. A trick of my tired eyes, maybe a shadow from the trees. I filled up my tank, bought another cup of coffee, and kept going. But I could not stop thinking about that feeling. A few days later, I stopped at a truck stop about 100 miles south of that area. I needed fuel and a meal that was not wrapped in plastic. The place was quiet. A few trucks parked under yellow lights. The smell of diesel and fried food hung in the air. I sat inside with a plate of eggs and toast, listening to the radio chatter between drivers. It was the usual stuff: weather, road conditions, small talk. Then one voice came through, a tow truck driver. His tone caught my attention right away. He sounded nervous, careful. He said he had seen something strange on the northern highway a few nights before. Something large, something that crossed the road right in front of him. He paused for a long time before he said what he thought it was. He said it looked like a Bigfoot. The diner went quiet. I saw a few other drivers glance toward the radio, but no one laughed. The man went on to describe what he saw. It was tall, broad-shouldered, covered in dark hair. It moved quickly but smoothly. It crossed the road in 2 or 3 steps and vanished into the trees. He said he had never seen anything like it before. He said he was not the kind of man who made up stories. He just wanted to warn anyone driving that stretch to be careful. The hair on my arm stood up again. The description matched exactly what I had seen. The size, the movement, the way it seemed to glide through the bush like it belonged there. I sat there staring at my coffee while the man kept talking. My food went cold. Later that week, I mentioned the story to one of my clients. He was from an Aboriginal community in the northern region. He listened quietly while I told him what I saw. When I finished, he nodded slowly. He said the elders in his community spoke of beings like that. They were not legends to them. They were part of the land, part of the old world that still hides deep in the forest. He said they do not show themselves unless they choose to. He said if you ever see one, you should leave the area right away and never look back. His words stayed with me. That night, I dreamed of the forest. I saw the same highway stretching under a sky that had no stars. I heard heavy footsteps in the trees, something large breathing just beyond the reach of the headlights. I woke up in my truck with my heart pounding. The window was fogged up from my breath. The air smelled like wet pine even though I was parked in a gravel lot. Weeks passed, but I kept thinking about that place. The feeling I had when I drove past it. The stories I heard. The dreams that would not stop. I told myself I was being foolish, but something deep inside wanted answers. So one weekend I decided to drive that road again. It was late afternoon when I reached the area. The light was fading. Long shadows stretched across the road. The trees seemed darker than before. I slowed down as I approached the spot. My pulse quickened. I recognized the same bend, the same ditch, the same wall of trees. I stopped the truck on the shoulder, turned off the engine. The silence was so thick it hurt my ears. I stepped out. The air was cold and still. The forest smelled damp and old. I could hear my own breathing. For a moment, everything was calm. Then I heard something move in the bush, a slow, heavy step. Then another, the sound of something large shifting its weight. My mouth went dry. I could not see anything through the trees, but I could feel eyes on me, watching, waiting. I wanted to get back in the truck, but my legs would not move. I stood frozen. Then I heard a low sound, not a growl, more like a deep rumble that came from far inside the trees, the kind of sound you feel in your chest. I backed away one step at a time. My boots crunched on the gravel. The noise stopped. The forest went silent again. I climbed into the truck, slammed the door, and started the engine. The headlights lit up the trees for a second, and that is when I saw it. A shape standing just behind the first row of trunks, tall and dark, shoulders wide as the hood of my truck. It did not move. It just stood there, watching me. Its eyes reflected the light in a dull amber glow. Not like animal eyes, not bright, just dim, a steady glow like the last embers of a fire. I pressed my foot on the gas and drove away. I did not look in the mirrors. I did not slow down until I reached the next town an hour later. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone. I called my client, the same one who told me about the elders. When he heard my voice, he said quietly, "You went back, did you not?" I told him yes. I told him what I saw. He was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Now it knows you. Do not ever go back. Since that night I have not driven that road again. I take the longer route even if it costs me more time and fuel. I do not care. Every time I hear the sound of wind through trees, I remember those glowing eyes. I remember the feeling that crawled through my skin as my instincts screamed at me to run. Sometimes I still dream about that place. The forest, the silence, the shape in the shadows. In those dreams I can hear footsteps outside my truck, heavy, slow footsteps moving closer. I always wake up before anything happens, but the smell of pine lingers in my nose, and my hands feel cold like I have been gripping the steering wheel all night. I do not know what that creature was. I do not know if it was a Bigfoot or something older, something that does not belong to the world we know. All I know is that it was real. It was alive, and it saw me. There are places out there where the forest still belongs to itself, where the wild things never left, where the ground remembers what walked there before roads were built. If you ever find yourself on a long, empty stretch of highway with trees pressing in on both sides, and the air suddenly feels heavy and wrong, do not stop. Do not look into the trees. Just keep driving. Because once you see it, once you feel it, you will never forget that ancient fear. The one that whispers deep inside you that something out there is watching from the dark, waiting for the moment you let your guard down. And when it decides to move, you will know. You will feel it before you see it. The chill that creeps over your skin, the stillness that wraps around you, the weight of eyes that belong to something older than time. And by then it will already be too late. Story 7. The Ghost Truck and the Disaster. That never was. This story is one that truckers whisper at night when the highways are empty, and the only sound is the steady hum of their engines. It is a story that every driver who has heard it swears is true. They say it must be true because the alternative is too strange, too terrifying to believe. I heard it from my best friend. He was one of the men who lived it. He told me the story one cold night while we were sitting at a truck stop far out in the middle of nowhere. The coffee was bitter. The lights buzzed above our heads. Outside, the wind howled across the empty lot. He stared out the window for a long time before he began to speak. He said that years ago he had been working with another driver. The two of them were hauling gasoline. A full tanker load. Enough to fill an entire gas station several times over. Enough to destroy everything around them if something went wrong. He said that he and the other driver had been on the road for almost a week. The route was long and lonely, but they kept each other company through their radios. They told stories and jokes. They warned each other about speed traps and bad weather. They talked about home and food and the strange peace that came from being alone with the road. It was a clear morning when everything went wrong. They were both on the last stretch of highway, a straight open road that cut through rolling hills and quiet farmland. The sun hung low and bright in the sky. The road shimmered like a silver ribbon. It was the kind of day that made driving easy. Everything was calm. Then the radio crackled. The voice of the tanker driver came through. It sounded sharp and tight. He said the words that froze my friend's blood. My brakes are gone, completely gone. I have no stopping power at all. My friend said that his stomach dropped. He looked in his mirrors and saw the tanker truck behind him. It was gaining speed fast. The massive chrome tanker reflected the sunlight like a mirror. The truck weighed 80,000 pounds and it was carrying enough gasoline to turn the whole highway into fire. He grabbed his radio and shouted for help. He called to every driver in range. He told them what was happening. He said that a tanker was coming down the highway with no brakes and no way to stop. He asked everyone to help. He told them they needed to slow the tanker down before it reached a curve or a hill or a town. One by one, other truckers began to respond. They were scattered along the highway ahead of him. Each one understood the danger right away. They knew that if that tanker crashed, it would kill everyone nearby. The first few trucks began to form a line ahead of the runaway tanker. They slowed down carefully. My friend shouted directions. The drivers moved together like a team. They formed a rolling wall of steel and rubber. The plan was simple. They would all slow down together. Their combined weight and wind resistance would help to reduce the tanker's speed until it could stop. It sounded impossible, but it was all they had. My friend could hear the voice of the tanker driver over the radio. The man's breathing was heavy. His words came out in short bursts. He said that his hands were locked on the wheel. He said that the pedal went straight to the floor. He said that the truck was shaking and the engine was screaming. Police began to clear the road ahead. They closed off intersections. They moved cars off the shoulder. Drivers pulled over and watched in silence as the convoy approached. The sound grew louder and louder. It was a roar that came from the earth itself. Then the convoy came into view. My friend said he could still remember the sight. Dozens of trucks lined up in front of the tanker, each one moving in perfect rhythm, each one fighting to hold its speed. He said the air smelled like burning rubber. He said the heat of the engines rolled through the air like a wave, the radio filled with voices. Some calm, some shouting, everyone doing their part. Slowly, the tanker began to lose speed. The driver shouted that he could feel it. He could feel the weight pulling against him. The brakes were still gone, but the convoy was holding. The tanker dropped from 70 to 60, then 50, then 40. My friend could hear the strain in every engine. Metal groaned. Tires squealed. The smell of smoke filled the air. Finally, the tanker slowed to a crawl. The driver steered it onto the shoulder. The convoy followed. The engines went quiet one by one. The highway was silent again. The tanker had stopped. The driver was safe. No one had died. My friend said that for a long moment no one moved. The silence was so deep it hurt. Then the radio crackled and someone began to laugh. It was a shaky, nervous laugh. Soon everyone was laughing. It was the laughter of men who had just looked death in the face and survived. My friend got out of his truck. His legs were weak. He walked up to the tanker. The driver was sitting in his seat, pale and trembling. He looked like a ghost. They shook hands, but neither spoke. There were no words big enough for that moment. They stayed there until the police arrived. The officers were amazed that no one had been hurt. Mechanics came later to tow the tanker away. The brakes were completely gone. The lines had failed without warning. There was nothing the driver could have done. That night, my friend sat in a diner staring into a cup of cold coffee. He said he kept thinking about how close it had been. How easily everything could have gone wrong. He told me that if he had been driving 5 miles faster, or if he had turned off his radio, or if he had missed that first call, everything would have been different. The thought made his skin crawl. He said he learned something that day. He said that sometimes the smallest choices are the ones that save your life. Keeping your radio on, paying attention, responding when someone calls for help, working together even with people you have never met. But then his voice grew quiet. He leaned closer to me and said there was something else, something he had never told anyone else before. A week after the incident, he was driving that same stretch of highway. It was late at night. The road was empty. The sky was black. He said that when he came over a hill, he saw lights ahead, truck lights, dozens of them, red and white shining in the darkness. He slowed down thinking there had been an accident. As he got closer, he realized that the trucks were moving. They were in the same formation as the convoy from that day. The same line. The same pattern. But the strange thing was that there was no sound. His radio was silent. His engine hummed softly, but the trucks ahead made no noise at all. He watched in disbelief as they rolled down the highway in complete silence. No rumble of engines. No squeal of tires. Only the faint glow of their lights flickering in the dark. At the center of the convoy was a tanker truck. Its lights were dim and yellow. He said it looked old and weathered, like something that had been sitting in a junkyard for years. He could see the faint shape of the driver through the windshield, but the man did not move. My friend blinked and the lights vanished. The road ahead was empty again. He pulled over and sat there shaking. His hands would not stop trembling. He turned his radio on and off, but there was only static. For the rest of the night he drove with his headlights bright and his windows rolled up. He said that the air felt heavy, like someone was sitting in the passenger seat beside him. From that night on, he never drove that road again after dark. He said he believed that the convoy he saw was a reflection, a memory burned into the highway itself, a replay of that moment when fate held its breath. He said that sometimes the road remembers. It remembers the fear, the sweat, the prayers of the men who fought against disaster, and sometimes it shows those memories to the ones who were there. Years passed. The story spread among truckers. Some said they too had seen strange lights on that stretch of highway. Some said they had heard voices on their radios calling for help, even when no one else was on the channel. A few said they saw a single tanker truck driving with no lights in the middle of the night, always silent, always alone. My friend said that maybe it was the same truck. Maybe the spirit of the moment still rolls down that road, replaying the disaster that never was. He told me that the highways are alive. They hold the stories of everyone who drives them, stories of courage, stories of loss, stories of things that should never have happened but did, and of things that almost happened but did not. He said that what scared him most was not the ghost truck. It was the thought of how close they came to death that day, how fragile everything is, how one small decision can change everything. He said that sometimes the supernatural is not the scariest thing on the road. Sometimes the most terrifying thing is the real world itself. The weight of the fuel behind you. The sound of a voice saying the brakes are gone. The thought of fire rolling through the night. When he finished telling me the story, he went quiet. He looked out the window again. The wind was still howling outside. Then he said one last thing. Said if you ever drive that highway at night and your radio suddenly fills with static and you hear a man's voice saying his brakes are gone, you must answer. You must talk back even if no one answers you, because maybe it is only an echo, or maybe it is a warning. And if you ever see the silent convoy rolling through the dark, you must not follow it. You must pull over and wait until the lights fade away. 'Cause those trucks are not real anymore. They belong to the memory of the road. And that is the true story of the ghost truck and the disaster that never was.